4 years later as a curator.
So we would be asking you your background information about you.
Okay, what I do professionally or and that kind of thing, or
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And then we would go further on your stewardship to the lake park or the beach,
Sure.
and your concerns about the beach.
Can I talk about the fact that what it used to look like out here and why and what it looks like today and how I feel it should be?
Yeah, we want to know that.
Okay, all right,
And what used to happen when you were a child,
sure,
and your memories, your stories with this area or
sure.
the places around.
I can talk about Love Rock.
So when you answer us things, we'll pick up some points and we'll tell you to elaborate more on that.
Got it. Okay.
First of all, you want to start recording? So first of all, I'll give you this form. This is a consent form, which just you need to sign on it.
I got a pen.
It just tells you that this is just for education purposes and there are no risks. And your
Is that me here? Sign right here?
Yeah. Your interview, we might take your interview in our documentary, and so it would be public. So
No problem.
that's what it is all about.
What's today's date? The 17th. There you go.
So we would like to have your introduction first.
Okay, my name is MarkKuehn, K-U-E-H-N. I'm the curator at the North Point Lighthouse. I've been served on the board of directors for the North Point Lighthouse for about 4 years, and I've been the curator here for about 1.5 years now.
So can you tell us about where you're born and
I was born June 3rd, 1954 in Milwaukee, on the south side of Milwaukee. I grew up on the south side, went to school on the south side, went to a Catholic grade school. I went to a public high school called Boys Technical and Trade High School in Milwaukee, graduated in 1972. I started at the Layton School of Art and Design, which was a private art school college in Milwaukee here. Started in 1972, and in 1974 when the school closed, I went out east to Portland, Maine, and enrolled in the Portland School of Art and Design in Portland, Maine, where I graduated in 1976 with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. Came back to Milwaukee in 1976 and got into the advertising business. I'm currently a creative director at an advertising agency in Heartland. So I've been in the ad business since 1976.
so seems like you have a background in arts.
Yes, I do.
So, yeah.
I can. What's one thing that's my background in advertising and graphic design was part of the. I do all the exhibit designs here at the Lighthouse. So it's sort of a benefit. I get to use my talents here at the Lighthouse to do all the exhibits and all the marketing brochures and that kind of things. I do all that here as a service for the Lighthouse.
So you said you attended a school on the south side, an art school, which is a private art school.
Well, the art school was up here in Milwaukee. Was up on Port Road. It used to be. It was on Hampton Avenue and Port Washington Road. It was right on the river. It was called Layton School of Art and Design. Originally, Layton School of Art and Design was downtown in Milwaukee, I think on Mason Street.
Okay. So what are your memories with this area?
Well, this area, I started coming up to the east side of Milwaukee when I was a child. My uncle lived here. He was in the Coast Guard. He was transferred here from Woods Hole, Massachusetts in 1959. So he and his family were transferred up to Milwaukee. So they moved into this house in 1959. His wife was my mother's oldest sister. They had 4 children. And so we would come in here and visit. I was only in kindergarten. I was 5 years old, 6 years old. So we would come here during the day. We'd take the bus. My mother and I and my sister would take the bus up to the 27th Street bus up to Locust Street, take the Locust Street bus and stop here at the turnaround, which is still here. That we'd start and we'd walk over here to the house and stay with visit my aunt and uncle for the day, or my aunt was here. And then my father would pick us up at night. Now this wasn't every day, but this was on occasion. Again, I was preschool, so we could come here a lot. It was something to do. And then my mother's side of the relation has she had several sisters, and so consequently I had a lot of cousins. I had 24 first cousins on my mother's side. So this is where we would come to have picnics and birthday parties, because it was at a park. We had a house here. We had a lighthouse that we could, play around. And so my memories as a child were coming here, playing in the ravines, going down to the beach, watching the fireworks on the 4th of July from the tower. It was a lot of fun here to come here as a child, and now there was a road out here at the time, out in front of the lighthouse. The road was closed in 1964 because the bridges got too frail, because the bridges were the original bridges from the 1893 when they were built as a park here. So they closed the bridges off because they were afraid that car traffic would ruin the bridges. So, but when this was a road, there was car traffic through here. And the golf course was here at the time. The pavilion was just a park pavilion. So it was a lot of nice memories to come here as a child and play.
We also got to know that the beach was not so safe, the Bradford beach. So
safe in what way?
It was not safe for children.
Well, my memories, after my relatives, after my uncle moved from here in 1961, we really didn't come back here that often. So I went back. We were back on the south side again. So, but what my recollections of the beach were, it wasn't as large as it is today as far as depth-wise. The lake was a lot higher then, and plus that they put a lot of fill into the beach to make it larger. But there used to be a small, what they call a custard stand. Now it's like ice cream place, but it was called custard stand. It was down across the street from where the current one is today, the Bartolotta's, the one that's on the beach. It was across the street from there. Where the lagoon is today, across from the lagoon, it's all landfill. That was not there. That was the lake. On the other side of that lagoon was where the lake is. That's all been landfilled in the late 60s, early 70s. But as far as safety goes, I guess it was probably not, there was a lot of, like today, you have, as soon as it gets warm out, where does everybody go? The beach. So it was pretty crowded. I'm sure there was probably crime at that time. It wasn't very well landscaped. The park was falling into some hard times in those days. I do also remember that right down the path here, there's a little nondescript cement block building. It's a park building now. That was the radar room for the Nike missile site. Now, during the Cold War, the United States was worried that we were going to be bombed by the Russians. They were going to come through Canada. Milwaukee was a target during the Cold War because of our industrial strength. We did a lot of heavy machinery was made here. During the Second World War, parts of the atomic bomb were made here at Allis-Chalmers. So we were very large. We were the machine shop of the world for a long time. So there used to be missile silos down here at the lake, Summerfest, Warnemont Park, I believe up here at the water purification plant. And the radar tower, was here along with the radar room. That was up in the top here. So that was, I always remember we used to walk by there and see the radar tower. So it was, the park was not really as nice as it is today. The pavilion was kind of run down, but so that's what I remember of the park.
So about this house, when did you join as a curator here? And
well, I've been with the Lighthouse, the North Point Lighthouse Friends for about 4 years. So I started. I didn't. Again, I had lived out east for a few years. I came back to Milwaukee. I lived on the east side after college, but I always knew that this house had been boarded up, and it stood abandoned for a number of years. And so I never really paid much attention to it. But then I started seeing the signs that they were renovating it. So I was kind of looking forward to seeing when it was in open. And one day I was driving past here with my two daughters. I have an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old daughter. I noticed it said they were open. So I said, hey, let's go. I'll show you where my cousins used to live. So we came in here, and we took a tour, and I told one of the docents here that I used to live here. I used to visit here as a child, and next thing, one thing led to another, and I got on the board of directors. So I'm very, very happy for the fact that this house was renovated and became a museum. So I can tell a lot of stories. I tell a lot of stories when I give tours here about being here as a child. So it's kind of interesting.
So you had your uncle's family here.
Yes.
But then after, do you have any idea that after your uncle's family, there was some other family who stayed here?
There were several Coast Guard families that lived here. We do have some of the names. I don't have any names right offhand, but this was a government Coast Guard facility or residence, I think, until the late 1980s. So they were just caretakers again. They were just lived here. But once the Coast Guard turned the light off here in 1994, they closed the building. They gave the building to the county. But there were several families. There were also families that lived down at the along the lake at the what was called the Life Saving Station, Coast Guard Station, which was demolished a few years ago. There's just a little pavilion down there. It's right on just south of the Flushing Channel. On the at the yacht club, there's that little thing. It's called the Flushing Channel, where the pumping station used to be, and right across from there was a Coast Guard, the lifeboat station it was called. So we knew families. My aunt and uncle knew the families that lived there, so we'd go down there too and hang out with them, with those people. But yeah, I do remember the 4th of July. That was always a fun time to come down here, especially watching the fireworks in the tower. It was kind of fun.
So they used to happen at the beach?
Right at Brantford Beach. They'd set them off. In fact, my sister, I have an older sister and older cousins, and the older kids would go down to the beach, and they'd shoot the fireworks off at the beach, and we'd watch them from up here. It was kind of fun.
So between when you came, or when you were an adult and living in Milwaukee, and when you noticed that the lighthouse was open again, did you have reason to come up in this direction?
Well, not really, no. When I got out of school, I moved up to Capitol and Downer. I lived up in Whitefish Bay, Shorewood area, and I really didn't have any, Lake Park was just never, I was a single guy out of college, so I had no reason really to come here. But, I always knew the lighthouse was here, but when I would go past the lighthouse when it was abandoned, I just felt bad because it was just it was a sad, to see the bridges were in bad decay. There's right outside the front window here, there's what's called a cannonade or a vista. It was originally built as a vista, and then I think sometime in the 1890s, maybe early 1900s, there was a cannon. They brought a cannon here it was a Civil War cannon, coastal cannon. I don't know if you're familiar with a lot of after the Second World War, they had a lot of surplus armaments like cannons, like the cannons or tanks. You see them at VFW posts around the area. Well, after the Civil War, they had a lot of surplus cannons, and what do you do with a cannon? Well, you give it to a park. Now, there was a cannon here, and there was a cannon up at Juneau Park, or down at Juneau Park also. The cannon disappeared, we think, around the start of the Second World War, because during the Second World War, there was a need for metals, so for munitions and things, so they melted it down. So the cannon disappeared. But there was a statue out there. I remember when I was a child, there was a statue of Christian Wall, which Wall Avenue was named after. He was the first, I believe he was the first commissioner of parks in Milwaukee. And his statue was originally out in front of the pavilion where the Lake Park Bistro is, and it was moved here at some point. And now it resides in Wall Park on 43rd and Hampton, I believe. It's still there. I want to get it back here. I want to put it back where it was. So it'd be kind of nice to bring that back. My passion with this place is, or not this place, with the lighthouse and the park, is to bring back the ambiance that it has when it opened in 1893. This was the park to come to on a Sunday afternoon. Everybody dressed up. You had picnics. You had concerts up here at the pavilion. You had carriage rides, horseback riding. This was a wonderful place for gathering of people. And I think, with the efforts of the Lake Park Friends and the North Point Lighthouse Friends, we're starting to bring that back again. The statue over here of you see on the man on the horse, he was the first Surgeon General of the Civil War. The reason that statue is here is because he used to this was his favorite park to ride his horse. And after he died, his wife dedicated the statue in his memory out here. So it's kind of interesting to have a statue of yourself in a park. And also the fountain has been restored. I mean, not the fountain, the waterfall feature, that was recently restored too.
So you want to restore the whole area, not only the lighthouse?
No, but the whole park. I think this, and well, we want to, the original lighthouse that was out here, which was this one right over here on this, you see a picture of it on this side of this thing? That was about 100 yards out the front door, right across the Lion Bridge and right on the bluff. That was, that's where the original lighthouse was built in 1854. But in 1888, the bluff started to erode. And because there was no trees, there was no vegetation on the bluff. Remember this, before this was a park, there was nothing out here. This was farmland. There was a large farm to the north of us, and the rest of it was just fields and probably just wheatgrass or prairie grass. And so that's, when they built the house here, they built it close to the bluff. But in 1888, the bluff was eroding from a lot of rain and stuff, so they moved it in here. What we're trying to do is working with Discovery World and trying to get we did some excavations over there, and our plan is to eventually to do more exploration over there and put up some kind of an exhibit or a footprint of where the original lighthouse was. So that, again, this is not just this structure, it's the whole neighborhood. It's how the neighborhood evolved around the lighthouse.
So when you came here as a child, do you remember your uncle telling you about the stories about the Sailing 55?
No, I don't. No, because they really didn't know either. My parents all grew up on the south side of Milwaukee, the Jackson Park area. So we probably had, if my uncle had not moved here, we probably would not have ever come to this park, because it was, we would take, rides down to the lake once in a while. Again, the art museum was quite small at the time. There wasn't really much to do down here. There was no Summerfest, so there was no real the downtown area along the lake was all industrial, and the old railroad station was down where where the Discovery World is today. Not Discovery World, the Betty Bryn. That's where the original Northwestern train depot. So there was a train. The railroad ran along the lake and then turned back in here. So no, but there was no reason we never would have come out here. We had parks on Forest Home Avenue, 35th and Forest Home is where Jackson Park. That's where I really grew up in as another park. So I like parks, yeah. But no, I would never have come out here.
Do you remember any kind of new constructions taking place when you used to come here?
I remember as a child, probably could have been the 60s, early 60s. They were tearing down a lot of the mansions along right up here on the top of right where the water tower is. There's a grass area now across. There's like a little fountain right just to the south of the water tower. There were probably 6 or 7 beautiful mansions they tore down. For some reason in the 60s they started tearing down a lot of the old mansions. So there was more. I don't want to call it destruction, but they were taking a lot of the history away from here, and then for some reason just, there was, as far as the other kind of construction around here or buildings, not really. There wasn't a lot of, there wasn't a lot of urban sprawl here. Most of the urban sprawl was to the west of here, and to the south. That's when they were starting to build shopping malls. The first shopping mall in Milwaukee was Southgate on 27th and Oklahoma. Then came Capitol Court. So the push was west, and not so much north because of the inner city. Kind of stopped it. The freeway was probably the biggest piece of new urban building back in the 60s, early 60s. My grandmother lived on right where the freeway goes right through where her house would have been right now, like on Locust Street on the I-43. They tore down a lot of we tore down Old Borchard Field, which was the original ballpark in Milwaukee, was called Borchard Field. That was all torn down for the freeway. So there were a lot of homes were taken down to build the freeway. So that kind of split the east side with the west side when they built the freeway. It really divided the city. The inner city became on the west side of the freeway. The more affluent stayed on the east side of the freeway. So freeways can do some bad things to populations.
Was the division before the freeway that obvious, or was it really the freeway that came through that did it?
I think the freeway really did it. My feeling is that the freeway really divided that part of the city. I mean, years ago, I mean, my mother grew up in that area and went to North Division High School and stuff, and it was that area was a lot of the Jewish, it was a lot of Jewish, and then Milwaukee was Jewish and German. The south side of Milwaukee was German and Polish. The Lower East Side, which was Brady Street, was the Italian district. One of my aunts married an Italian man, and so that was the Brady Street. Brady and Holton was that was the Italian district. The inner city was, up in a little bit like between around east of 27th Street, Locust, North Avenue, 3rd and Cherry, 3rd and Ring. That was the inner city at the time. North of Milwaukee, I mean, Shorewood and Whitefish Bay. I didn't even know Shorewood and Whitefish Bay and Fox Point existed until I was in high school. Never knew about it. Never came up here.
You said that people from all over the city would come to this park when it was first built. It was a big draw.
Yeah, in 1893, the city wasn't that large, but this was probably even in the early 1900s. I'm sure this was a very popular park until probably the 30s or the 40s. This was always a very popular park. I believe that the golf course was here for a long time, even in the early 1900s. The golf course was here. I saw someplace that you could camp here back in the early 1900s or early 20s. You could actually tent camp here.
And at that point, this would have been still outside of the city?
No, this was the city of Milwaukee. I think it sort of petered out probably just north of here, because Lake Drive and that isn't. Whitefish Bay is probably incorporated in the 20s, early 20s, and then from there north it was. But there was a rail line, a small gauge rail line that would run up to Whitefish Bay, to the Whitefish Bay. It was called the Pabst Whitefish Bay Resort. And that's where the railroad car was. The railroad would stop. The train would stop at around on Henry Clay, and then people would go over to the resort. It was a very popular resort. At one time, it had the largest Ferris wheel in the country in it. But a lot of steamships would leave from Milwaukee and steam up to Whitefish Bay rather than drive, because there weren't really that many roads here. So a lot of people from Chicago would come up here.
From whatever conversation we had, you really have a liking to old buildings.
Yes.
And the idea of preservation. So, is it because you have a background in art?
Yes, I think so. I've always liked history. I liked history in school. I lived out east. I used to summer out in Maine. I like nautical. I like maritime history. I build boat models. My great uncle built this boat and the one around the corner. I learned from him. So for some reason, it's interesting. I've always had this connection with water. I grew up in Milwaukee, which is close to the lake. I've always liked the lake. I used to come down to the lake with my father, my parents. I always used to like to come. I took a cruise on the Milwaukee Clipper, which was a ship that was in Milwaukee for a number of years. And it's a ferry boat. It was a car ferry, and we took that across the lake. But I've always had this aversion for boats and maritime. And then when I went out east, I used to summer out east in Maine, and I lobster fished out there, and I was always interested in history. So when I had the opportunity to come here, this was like a dream come true. I get to play with all this stuff and collect things and stuff like that, so it's kind of fun.
Were there any other places around you visited like a church or any other memories like that?
Not on the east side, no. We would visit places on the south side. There was let's see, churches. No, there was a few. The Basilica, St. Joseph's Basilica, maybe once in a while, but no. There was when the Frank Lloyd Wright, when they built the Greek temple, the Dome Temple on the west side. That was it. My aunt lived a few blocks from there, so we'd go over. We went over there when that was built. But no, not. There weren't that really many. The public museum was. That again, we didn't have that much. We didn't have many museums here. We had the public museum, Whitnell Park. We go there a lot. It was near where I grew up. The domes when they first opened, that was a very popular place to go. And the zoo. But that's about it.
And do you remember the people who were staying around?
Around here, not too much. When I
Interactions with them?
No, not really. My cousin went to I had a cousin that was my age, and so when they lived here, she was in kindergarten. I remember going to kindergarten or with her a couple times. There's the school is still over here on it's on Prospect, I believe. It's kind of on a triangle. It's right near the hospital. Maryland Avenue School. Yeah. Yeah, that's that. I remember going there one time. But as far as the neighborhood, no, we never ventured across the street. When I was only 5 years old, we were in the park here. We stayed in the park. We would play over here, by the golf course, or we'd play mostly playing in the ravines. I would not let my children play in the ravines today. But our parents just go out there. Just come back when it's time. When it's dinner time, come back. We were out all day.
When you were taking the trip up from the south side to the lighthouse up here, do you remember anything about the trip?
It was a bus trip. It was the number 14 bus, I think. No, it was the 27th Street bus. So I'd get on the bus on 27th and Forest Home, and take it all the way up to Locust Street, and then transfer with another bus that would take us here. So, it was they were called trolley buses. They weren't on a rail. They had the wires, so they were a trolley bus. And then it would take probably about 45 minutes to an hour to get here. And then I always remember getting the bus at the turnaround. That was the turnaround. It's still there. The turnaround is still there. The bus would stop. There was a layover for the bus, and we'd get off and we'd walk through the park and come over here. And then my father would pick us up after he got out of work at night. He'd drive up here and pick us up, and we'd drive home. But again, if there were parties, if there was a birthday party or something like that, then we'd drive here. My family would drive up here. But it was always 27th Street because there was no freeway.
This neighborhood is a fairly wealthy neighborhood. Was there any was there a time when you could tell, okay, I'm in North Point, these are the nice houses?
No, didn't remember that. No, we were just, again, it was almost like tunnel vision. You'd get off the bus and you walk here, and the lighthouse was it. And after, we didn't really associate with anything. And again, this being a functioning building, a lighthouse, this wasn't an attraction. They had a fence. There was a big cyclone fence around this thing, primarily to keep my aunt and uncle's dog. They had a big collie that used to live that they had here, so it was a cyclone fence to keep the dog in. But I remember the cinder driveway. This was all cinders, because I don't know why they brought them up here. The cinders came from someplace, but there was a black cinder. Everything was all cinders here. And
was that common?
Cinders was a common. It was the precursor to probably to gravel. Okay. It was it's the byproduct of coal burning. So they must have brought it up here from probably maybe from the water purification plant if they had something there. It was like, where do we dump this? But it was hard, glassy. It was a form of coal, and they would spread it out in the driveway. It was always.
So were these kind of driveways common around this area? Or
Cinder driveways?
Yeah.
No, they weren't. But it was, again, this was a park. this is a government building, so they put the cinder driveways. It was, again, instead of paving it, they put cinders down. And there was a lot of, gravel driveways and things, I'm sure, but probably not around this neighborhood because of the affluent houses. But again, I don't remember much about the house. It's kind of funny you asked that question. I'm thinking back like, boy, I don't remember the houses out there. Vaguely remember Donner Avenue, but again, there was no need to go here. We were here. This was our destination, and that was it. Then we went home.
And do you have some kind of interesting stories which are connected with playing in the ravines or?
Well, my older cousins that lived where Dad came here. One time we had a big, we called them rally rallies, which was all the relatives would get together, a big picnic, and we had the tables with all the food out at the base of the tower. And one of my cousins was up in the tower, and he dropped a tennis ball off, and it landed my mother's potato salad. And one of my cousins, the boy that lived here, my cousin, there was rumor has it that he broke something on the Fresnel lens one time. I don't know what. I didn't get up there very often because I was pretty small, and it was scary when this was always, the breezeway wasn't here. This was added later, the breezeway between the house and the tower. So that was, you accessed the lighthouse from outside, and it was always a dark, scary. We didn't go up there. As little kids, my little cousin, it was always spooky to go in there, so we stayed out of there. It was damp and spiders and all kinds of stuff, so we didn't go much. We just kind of stayed around the back. The ravines we'd always build. There was always a little trickle of water running through the ravine, and as kids we'd always build dams out of sticks and rocks and mud and try to dam up the little creek. So I remember spending a lot of time in the ravines. Yep, and then going over to the golf course and looking for golf balls. Stuff like that.
Are there any other ghost stories associated
No,
with?
you know what, people always ask us, is this place haunted? I said, no, but I said, if it was, I would love to meet one of our first keepers here, Georgia Stebbins. She was our keeper here from 1888 until 1907. I would love to meet her, but no, there's rumors that we have a lot of the paranormal people come here asking about ghosts. I said, no. Remember, a lighthouse was a place of good. It had a light. It helped people. So there was never any bad, no negativity to this, because it was a place which pushed out the light, so people could come here safely. So this was a safe place. What I did hear was that there's rumors that you could hear children's voices in the ravines sometimes on the South Bridge. We had a gentleman that was here about a year or so ago. He was a Native American, and he said that this was probably a very spiritual place, because now there was ancient Indian burial mounds here. There's only one left. I think a lot of them were destroyed when they built the park in the 1890s. But there was probably an Indian settlement out here, a village, because of the lake, and they think there was a freshwater spring over here and the fact that now we are between two ravines here, so it's almost like if you took an aerial view, you'd probably even see a point. The Native American man said this was probably, because it's a point, it probably meant something as a spiritual. There was something comes to a crossover or something. So if there are, it could have been, Indian, the spiritual, the Indians are very spiritual, so there could be. Outside, yes. Inside, no.
When the second lighthouse was built in 1888, and then the lake park was fully designed in 1893, I think
Right,
you said.
right.
When they built the second lighthouse, did they know that the park was going to be built around it?
No, because it was, this was just, they built it here. They were going to, after this house, after the original 1854 house started to deteriorate, they were going to relocate this. They thought that one of the plans was to relocate the house completely, or put a light ship out. In fact, there was a light ship out here for a while, but then they decided, well, let's keep it here, because it was a good point for navigation. A lot of the ships could could see it because we were high on a bluff, and so they moved it here in 1888. Now, remember in 1888 when they moved it here, there was nothing here. So it wasn't until 1893 that Olmsted came along and designed the park. So he was he loved, in fact, now he had something to work with. He had a lighthouse. So he kind of bookended with the bridges, used the lighthouse as sort of a place to put his bridges on either side. So we're kind of bookended by those bridges. 1912 rolls around. Now they had planted all these trees out here. Well, 1912, you can't see the lighthouse anymore. Now what? So they decided to, they dismantled the original house, built a structure, and added the original one on top again, which was kind of unique. The only lighthouse in the country built out of 3 lighthouses. And I think the only lighthouse in the country in a Frederick Olmsted park. And while he was here, he did Lake Park, Newberry Boulevard, Riverside Park, and Washington Park, our first zoo.
So after, you said 1912, yeah. So were there any other plantations done after 1912?
No, there was. I think that was as far as building the lighthouse structure. No, there was. They just raised the house. They just raised the tower. The house. They didn't do any really renovations to the house. It was just rebuilding the tower. The house might have been altered somewhat. I don't really quite know. They probably did some work on the porches and stuff like that. But no, there was an oil house out back. When I remember when I was a child, there was a garage. It had been turned into a 1-car garage, and that was demolished in, I believe, the early '80s. They demolished that house. It was a garage, but it was originally the oil house for this house, because this house was originally lit with mineral oil, and you'd have to bring it in jars or cans, and it was very flammable. So they kept the oil in drums outside, brought what they needed in the house, and took it up to the tower. That's how that was. But that house was, and I believe, I'm trying to find, I saw a photograph, and I can't find it anymore, but I believe there was a small house out to the north of this house. It could have been a shed, and there also had to have been an outhouse out here somewhere, at least until there was plumbing. There had to have been an outhouse out here. But I think when they were restoring the bridges here last couple of years, and when they did the bluff, the Cannonade or the Vista last year, one of the engineers, they brought in a lot of small artifacts, pieces of slate, a lot of coal. So my theory is that they took, again, back in the 1880s, early 1900s, you didn't have garbage pickup, so you took everything to the bluff and you threw it over the side. That was like in a farm. If you go to a farm, they took all their trash out in the back and dumped it in the woods. And that's where you can find some really cool stuff nowadays. Old bottles and everything went over the side, and then they just pushed it over, and gradually nature took over. So they found a lot of old bottles and square nails and things like that. My theory is after this, the original house of 1854 was abandoned. It stood abandoned for a number of years until they started building the park. Then they demolished the house. Well, in 1893, you're not going to be having dump trucks. You're going to just push the thing over the side. So we've been finding artifacts of pieces of Cream City brick and slate and nails and things that have gone over the side. It'd be nice to bring some of that back here. We're trying to do that. So the experience becomes, you come to the neighborhood, you're drawn into the park, you come to the light, the surroundings around you. So this becomes one big experience. It's the park, the light, the people, the neighborhood, the history. It's a really nice. It's still, the light brought ships in. The light still brings people in, but they come from the land now. Some come from the lake, but not really. They can't. The light's not working anymore. So, but your GPS can get you here.
And the lions on the bridge.
Those are the original lions. They were the sculptor's name is on the lions. Again, that was part of Olmsted's plan to put the lions up there. And there were, in the ravines, I have some photographs, some postcards I can show you, that the ravines were all, were wooded, boardwalks kind of things, with stairs and all elevated boardwalks so you could walk down here. So it was a very you know, there was a lot of paths here, and again, probably carriage. This was very popular on a weekend, I'm sure, on the Sunday afternoon, a lot of carriage rides, and bicyclists would come by here. So this was, and then Georgia Stebbins, the woman that lived here for a number of years, she was a very avid gardener. And so she had a beautiful flowers out in front of this place. So a lot of people would make this, they would picnic on the front lawn of the lighthouse, and then she would let people come up in the lighthouse and go up the tower. But everybody had to get out when it started getting dark out because she had to get to work. Because you know, if that light's not working, you got a lot more shipwrecks out there than you do today.
I've heard that the ravines on either side of the lighthouse were actually man-made, that Olmsted designed them.
No, some of them were filled in. They were a natural runoff. No, in fact, no, these ravines were here. I think he reconfigured them. I guess he filled a lot of them in so they could get the stairways and stuff. So, but when it rains and stuff, this was always a very, all the water would go down to the lake. An engineer told me that, we had some floods in Shorewood a few years ago, really bad flooding. Well, there's an underground creek or river, and the water found its natural way down, and it happened to be underneath Shorewood. But I think I'm pretty sure that these were here. Yeah.
Can we have a walk?
Oh, of course you can.
Yeah.
Sure.
I'm going to stop and then restart. Yeah, my thing is always when you can stop, just to restart. And I'm going to do the same for this, and I'm going to put a battery on here.
So we can start over here. I can give you. All right. Oh, you're going to follow us? Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to just switch the batteries up and follow along here.
Come back when you start doing your archiving. I believe you're going to do some archiving. So I've got lots of stuff.
We documented some of the buildings which were not documented, but I think we have this.
You have that one?
Yeah, documented. I guess
This is kind of a cool picture. So here's Newberry Boulevard. Olmsted did this.
Yeah.
Here's the lighthouse.
Yeah.
This was the road that came through here. The pavilion. There used to be a beautiful, like a stadium down here. There's what remnants of it are still here. This was an old running track. I remember it was cinders.
And where was the golf course?
It's right here. It's right here. It's still here.
So they do practice golf here?
Oh, sure. Yeah, this is very popular. It's an 18-hole pitch and putt. It's called pitch and putt. And they also have these here are the lawn bowling. And
Okay. Yes.
some croquet. Oh, I put my beer down. That's what you need, a guy sitting there drinking beer. Okay, what I can start you with is over here behind us here. This was the first lighthouse in Milwaukee. This was built in 1838, and this was at the end of what is Wisconsin Avenue today. So the Calatrava would be right back here. This is Wisconsin Avenue. This is called Lake Emily. It's still there. It's underneath Northwestern Mutual. It's a spring-fed lake. And what happened was, this was all swampy area. So when they started building the buildings, they had to drive wooden pilings into the ground. And Northwestern Mutual is built on wooden pilings. And so they have to keep this, it's in a sub basement, but they have to keep the lake level up high so the wood doesn't get dry rot. And so that's why that lake is Lake Emily. It's still there. Milwaukee at this time probably had about 1,000 residents at the time. This was the Northwest Territory. This is as far as it went. This was Indian territory. A lot of different Indian tribes were here in that time. But as the white population started moving west, You had a lot more shipping, and the Erie Canal was open, so you had more immigration and commerce coming into the Great Lakes. Milwaukee started becoming a pretty important port. It was the largest port on the Great Lakes for a number of years, larger than Chicago. Chicago became Chicago because when the railroads were put in because of the cattle in the western. So you had a lot of ships coming down to Milwaukee. What was happening was the ships couldn't see the harbor because the light was not properly installed. It wasn't a good spot. It wasn't very tall. So they decided to move it out here to North Point, where we are tonight. This is the northernmost point of Milwaukee. So in 1854, they built this house out on the bluff. Now what happened in the 1880s, you can see that the bluff started to erode through, you can see there was not much out here. These bluffs were pretty steep and they were just eroding. This is St. Mary's Hospital right here today. Here's where the pumping station is, the yacht club, the Altera. And so they would take their small schooners or sailboats up here. There was a stairway that worked its way up to the top here. So in 1888, again, they realized they thought it was gonna fall over. So they abandoned this house. And what they did is they took the lantern room, which was this black thing. You can see it. This photograph was probably taken in the early 1900s, after the house had been abandoned. They took the lantern room off of this house and they put it on top of the house that's here today. Now this is what it looked like out here. Nothing, just farmlands and things like that. So there wasn't any need to build it any taller than what it was. 1893, Frederick Olmsted comes around. He designs the parks, designs the bridges, you can see, starts planting all these trees. Well, you can see what was happening. The tree lines were starting to block out the view of the tower. So in 1911, 1912, they dismantled this house and they added this section right here, and they put the original tower back up. So what you do when you climb this tower, you go back in time. You start in 1912, 1888, and you end up in 1854. Now this was a working light until 1994 when the Coast Guard turned the light out, as I mentioned. And then it stood abandoned, or it was the county building. And then in about 2003, the North Point Lighthouse Friends got together and got the funding together, restored the house, and opened it as a museum in 2007. Behind you is the last lens that was in the house. This smaller lens was from the original house. This is called a fourth order Fresnel lens. Now this had a lens, this had a light would shine out in the lake up to 21 miles. That's how strong the beam was. Now this light rotated, but before electricity, in order to rotate the light, there were two cables that ran through the center of the light, down to the center of the tower, into the basement of the tower. There were 230-pound counterweights, and they would have a crank on this platform, and the keeper would have to crank it up like a cuckoo clock, and it would rotate for 12 hours before they had to re-crank it again. This house was originally lit with mineral oil, and then in 1912 it was converted to coal gas and electrified in 1929. The first house was lit with whale oil. Some of the keepers we have out here, had here, now these aren't all the keepers. These are just some of the keepers that we have history on. Eli Bates was one of the first keepers at the house on Wisconsin Avenue in 1838. He was quite an interesting character. He came from out east. He came to Milwaukee. He was a school teacher. He taught at one of the first schools in Milwaukee, which was right around Cathedral Square. He helped establish one of the first public schools. And so he was a school teacher by day and a lighthouse keeper at night. And he was a bachelor, and in order to keep himself occupied at night, he'd invite his buddies over for smoking, gambling, and drinking parties. So they used to say that the light wasn't the only thing that was lit up on at night. He lost his job as a lighthouse keeper, and he went down to Chicago. He got into the lumber business. He became a millionaire, and he was a major benefactor for the statue in Lincoln Park in Chicago called the Storks Fountain. Daniel Kellogg Green was a keeper out at the house, the 1854 house. He was out here from 1871 until 1881. This is his daughter, Georgia Stebbins. Now, Georgia lived in New York City when he was here, and in 1873 she was diagnosed with what they called a consumption or tuberculosis. So her doctors sent her out to Milwaukee to recuperate with her parents. Well, she gets out here, she moves in with her parents at the lighthouse. Her father's health is failing, So she takes over for lighthouse keeping duties from him in 1881, becomes a keeper in 1881, and was our first resident in this house in 1888. Our longest serving resident, also longest serving lighthouse keeper. She had a son, Albert, while she lived out here. Her husband was a watchmaker, and he had a small jewelry store downtown in Milwaukee on Mason Street. And so he had an apartment down there, so he lived down in Milwaukee. So she spent most of her time out here by herself. She also had a large dog called a Mastiff. It was a very large dog, guard dog called Tappin. Her duties included climbing this tower every 3 to 4 hours, starting at dusk, with her pitcher of mineral oil, her hurricane light. She would trim the wicks in the lamp, clean the glass, wind the mechanism until dawn, every 3 hours until dawn. We figured the time she lived here, she climbed these stairs close to 63,800 times. She also would have to keep a log of everything she did. This is an excerpt from a log from September of 1902. September 1st, light, south winds, clear, change wick and lamps, 5 schooners, 4 steamers in sight. September 7th, southeast winds, clear. I went to the city, left at 10 a.m., returned at 1:30 p.m. 6 steamers, 1 schooner in sight. So she'd have to keep a log because she would have lighthouse inspectors come here, check out what she was doing, that she was maintaining the house in proper order, because if not, she would lose her job. A lot of lighthouse keepers lost their jobs. She was paid $600 a year as payment, and she got to live here for free. Some of the other keepers that lived here, Martin Knudsen and Reynolds Johnson, both served here. They both retired from this house. It was common for lighthouse keepers to work at several other lighthouses. They would be transferred from one house to the other. Martin served at Pilot Island, South Manitou, and Plum Islands, which was up in the tip of Door County area. Reynolds Johnson served on Lake Michigan, Manitou Island. He also served in Michigan also. He was a keeper at the Grand Traverse Light in Michigan. 1937, the Coast Guard took over the lighthouse from the U.S. Lighthouse Service, and then began, like I said, these became Coast Guard buildings. This is an original table. This was one of Georgia's, this was in this house when she moved here in 1888. This was one of her piece of furniture that we got from her great-great-grandson, Buzz Stebbins, brought it to the house when it opened as a museum.
So did he share any of his memories with you?
Not really. He's up in his late 90s. He lives down in Florida. He did give us several artifacts. I was not here when the museum opened, so I don't remember what we did a lot of this. Some of the stuff we got, the information we got from him. Other things we got through newspaper articles and history on lighthouse keepers. There's been several books written about lighthouse keepers, so it's pretty. You get a lot of stuff, but bits and pieces. We do have families that come in here, relatives, distant relatives. Oh, my uncle lived here, my great uncle, or my grandfather. We had a elderly lady in her late 90s come in here last year. She saw this picture and she said, "I used to play with that little girl when I was a child." So she remembered coming here as a child. So we do have people come in here and reminisce, which is kind of interesting. Behind here, this is kind of a little interesting piece of history. This was a story about what was called the Great Crib Disaster of 1893. Now, a crib was a structure built out on the lake that had a house on it. Now, this structure was right off of Bradford Beach. It was about 3,000 feet out in the lake. And in 1893, what they were doing was they were building a freshwater pipe to bring fresh water in from the lake out into the lake, back into the pumping station in Milwaukee. So this pipe, this tunnel, was 60 feet under the lake bed. So in order to get the shaft built, they went out on the lake and they built this crib. Now the crib, they built it out of wood and concrete, and then it was like a round structure or octagon, and they pumped the water out of it, and then that's how they got into the shaft to start tunneling back to the lake. On April 20th, 1893, there was a very large storm came up on the lake. 30-foot waves. All the miners, 15 miners, went down in the shaft to get out of the storm. They spent the night down there while the air was so foul. In the morning, they couldn't get out. They had to get out. They started coming up the shaft. They opened up the door. The water. What they didn't know was this 3-story structure was completely washed off the base at the night of the storm. Just completely gone. Georgia, the lighthouse keeper, had gone up in the tower, saw what had happened, came down, ran over to the nearest phone, which was at the Protestant home over here. It was called the Home of the Aged, which is it's still there. The house, the building is still there. It's a senior living center today. She went over there, phoned the lighthouse, the U.S. Life Saving Station, which was on Jones Island at the time. She phoned them, told them about what was happening. They got the lifeboat out, but the waves were so high they couldn't get the boat out into the lake. They tried towing it on a wagon. They couldn't get it very far. So a tugboat finally got a hold of a steam tug. It was called a steam tug. They towed it out to the site. At that time, there was only one man left. Five had made it out of the shaft. The other 10 were drowned in the shaft. 5 got out to the top. Again, now that was what was left of it. They only got one man off of the structure. The base of the shaft stood out on the lake until 1986. Someone back in the 60s sprayed the word love on it. It was always known as Love Rock. For years and years and years, it was known as Love Rock. And I remember as a child driving by there, and it was always, what is that? It was called Love Rock. And you'd try to swim out there. People would try to swim out there and jump on it. It was just a pile of rubble. And back in 1987, they found it was becoming a navigation hazard, so they dismantled, they destroyed it. This is a photograph of them taking it apart. It's still out there. It's below the water level now. But it's an interesting story. And then the miners. The sad part of it is when this disaster was unfolding, all the families of the miners came down to the shore, watched as their husbands and whatever they couldn't get them off. So it was quite a disaster. I can turn this around for you real quick. This is the original pumping station. Now today is where the Altera is. There's a small part of it left. That would be probably right about here. But this is what it looked like originally. Now St. Mary's Hospital, St. Mary's Tower is right here. So this is what it looked like out here back in the 1873 when this structure was built. This was a little later a postcard of it, what it looks like from the back. The original freshwater tunnel that I just spoke about was right here. And then later, this one was built. It was off of the Linwood Station, which is out to the northeast of us here. This is still here. This pipeline again is under the lake bed, and it runs right across the front yard of the lighthouse. The lighthouse would be right about here. This pipe runs back to here to the pumping station. This goes over here to what's called the Linwood pumping station. Here's the Milwaukee River. This was what's called the reservoir. This was they filled it in. This is on the end if you take North Avenue until you have to go around this thing. That was the reservoir. This was what it looked like. It held 20 million gallons of water. This was built before they decided to put in the fresh water pipe. They filled this in a few years ago. It's a park now. This is a photograph of what the tunnel looked like, the shaft that they were building here. So it was pretty, and this was 1891, 60 feet under the lake bed. So you figure and in those days, it was pretty tough life. And this is a fragment of the clay pipes. A lot of the pipes out here in this area were water pipes in Milwaukee were all clay.
You said that reservoir is a park now.
Mm-hmm. It's called.
Where is it?
It's if you take North Avenue, you cross the Milwaukee River, and if you have to go around it, you'll see it. It's a raised park. It's called Reservoir Park.
It's between Humboldt and Holton. So when you go on North Avenue west of the river, the main street just west of it is Humboldt, and then you go west, and then you have to go kind of like a half circle, and to the right is Reservoir.
You'll turn back into North Avenue again.
Yeah. So you'll see it's like a big hill.
Not the safest neighborhood. This is the fog bell. This was housed on the municipal pier downtown, right near this off of where the Calatrava is today. This was housed in a large open structure on the end of the pier, and it was rung originally by cranking a very large spring-wound mechanism. And this thing would ring for about 1,000 times before they had to crank it up again. And then it was run by steam, and then it was finally electrified. It was decommissioned in 1969, so it was out there a long time. A lot of shipwrecks out on the lake, close to 2,000 on Lake Michigan alone, 10,000 on the Great Lakes. The first known shipwreck, they just found it, they think they found it, was the Griffin, which sank in 1679. It was a French trader ship. They think they found it. So some artifacts off of a wreck. This was called a car ferry Milwaukee. Now, car ferry meant that they would hold up to 27 railroad cars on these ships. And these ships would go across the lake with these railroad cars. And in the night of October 21st, 1929, there was a very large storm came up on the lake. A lot of the ships stayed in port except for this one, the Milwaukee, headed out to Grand Haven. It got about 21 miles out, and the storm was so bad the captain turned the ship around to come back. Well, once he turned around, he got about 5 miles off of Whitefish Bay. The ship was pitching so heavily, the railroad cars broke loose and poked a hole in the side. The ship sank. 51 lives were lost. All hands were lost. They found lifeboats 6 days later in Michigan with bodies in them that they had washed up. They were finding boats all over the place. This is called a telegraph, a Chadbourne telegraph. There were 2 of these on the ship. This one was up in the bridge where the captain was. And there was another one in the engine room. And in order for the captain wanted to go one way or the other, they'd turn this, it would ring a series of bells, it would register on the telegraph in the engine room would reply with their Chadbourne, and the captain knew that they were responding to which way the ship would go. If you see the movie The Titanic, when they hit the iceberg, they go ding, 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 all stop. That's called a Chadbourne telegraph. Move these chairs out of the way. This is called a traveling library. Now, a lot of the lighthouses on the Great Lakes or in Lake Michigan were not accessible by road. They were accessible by you had to get to them by a boat. So there was a ships called lighthouse tenders that would bring supplies to the lighthouses. One of the things they brought were boxes of books for people to read. Some had novels on, some had children's books because children used to be homeschooled. I like to call this the first Kindle. But this is what people, they'd sign your name on there and they would pick you up, it would pick up one box, take it to another lighthouse, and then you'd get a different box. These are the original books that were from this collection. Some other articles here, items. These are the original vessels that Georgia would take to the top with her oil. And this was the light that she'd put inside the lens. Now this is what would light the lens. It was amazing, something that small, but it was all through illumination and refraction of light and prisms that this would light. So that's what she would take up to the tower with her. This was her journal. This was her scrapbook that she started in 1866. So you can see what it looked like when she first moved out here. It was pretty scratchy looking, scrubs and not much out here. But once this became a park, like I said, this was the place to come to. She became an attraction in the park. Behind you is, this is called a binnacle. Binnacle was the ship's compass, and this would be on the bridge, and the ship's wheel would be right about here, and then the navigator or the helmsman would look in here to find direction. At night, they'd put a little kerosene lamp in here to illuminate it. This came off the wreck of the Wisconsin. The Wisconsin sank 2 days after the Milwaukee sank in a storm. 3 days after this one sank, the Senator sank, was struck by another ship. 3 ships in the course of a week. It's amazing that this lake, as big as it is, can take a lot of ships. This over here is a model of the Great Lakes schooner. These were the workhorses of the Great Lakes. They carried everything: coal, iron ore, corn, potatoes, lumber, a lot of lumber. This was a photograph of the Lucia Simpson under sail. Chicago was built twice by Wisconsin lumber, so there was a lot of lumber being taken down to Chicago. When these ships became too old to sail, they would take the masts off of them and use them as barges behind the steamships. Or they got too frail they got too rickety to sail, or even as barges, they'd take them out in the lake and they'd set them on fire and they'd sink them. Up here, over here, these are a couple of artifacts off of a wreck of the Grace A. Channon. She sank in 1877, August of 1877. She was loaded with 550 tons of coal. She has headed down to Chicago and at night, and she was struck by steam tug coming up from Illinois, and she sank in 3 minutes. She went down. The only life lost was of the 7-year-old son of the owner. He was on board with his father and his other brother. It's kind of unique to see an iron wheel. Most ship's wheels are wooden, but this one is cast iron. This is called a port light off of the ship. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of shipwrecks. These are a list of some of the more infamous lakes. This lake is about approximately 360 miles long. Its deepest point is 920 feet, right about here. Its average depth is about 320 feet. Again, the first ship sunk on her maiden voyage was the Griffin in 1679. 1912, October 23rd, the Rouse Simmons, the 3 sisters, the 2 brothers, and the South Shore all sank. All those one day. But you don't hear much about it because what else happened in 1912? Very famous shipwreck. The Titanic went down. Today, this would be a major story. In those days, the Titanic. 1950, June 23rd, a Northwest Airlines flight 2501 disappeared over the lake. They never found it. Largest ship that ever sank on Lake Michigan was the SS Bradley in 1958. So one of the worst disasters was the 1960, the Lady Elgin. She was on her way back from Chicago to Milwaukee, was struck by a 3-masted schooner that was coming to the south. A storm blew up. It was one of those, on Lake Michigan, you get all the storms will come up really fast. This storm blew up, a squall came in, hit the schooner heeled over, the load of lumber shifted on the ship. They couldn't steer it. So they were on just a course where they couldn't, and it was by fate. Here comes the Elgin. She glanced off the bow of the Elgin. Elgin gets a gash in it and sinks in 3 hours, and 300 people are lost. Of 400 people, 300 died. Do folks want to go up to the tower? Okay. I mentioned that in the lantern, the light, the lens was rotated. It was in a clock mechanism. The cables came through down this shaft into the basement here. These were the weights were put. This was used as a root cellar or keep food cold in those days before refrigeration. We also put people in there that don't pay. Okay, well, let's go up to the top. 84 stairs to the top. Now this is what we're going through right now is the 1912 edition. You'll notice that the windows are round in this. As architectural aficionados, I'm always very curious what your opinion is on how this thing was built. I know it was bolted together. This is steel. When we get to, as we go up, the next level is cast iron. How would they have built something like this in 1912? Think about that. I don't know if you have any ideas. My cousin was here yesterday. He's an architect. He's out of Florida. He said they laid it on its side and built it. I said, I don't think they did. This is the base of the original tower. This is the base of the 1888 tower. You can see the windows are now rectangular, and this is cast iron put together in a different manner than the piece below us. This is the cannon that was there. This is before they put it on a base, a nice base, but this is what the cannon looked like. It was called a columbad, coastal cannon. They used to have them along the eastern seaboard. Nice shot outside the window there. I don't think the Dennis Sullivan is out. There's a couple of ships out there. Okay, so when you climb the top here, just keep your feet in the center of the. No one's afraid of heights. Are you afraid of heights? Okay. Just keep your watch the back. You guys watch the back of your heads when you get up here, and then just hang onto the rail. Watch the back of your head. Oh, there you go. Got it? You're pretty good with that. I wasn't going to let you.
I'm gonna get you in.
Oh, okay. I was going to let you.
Well, that's okay. I'll get a 360.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. When he comes up, why don't you come over here? And when he comes up, I can close up the hatch.
So that lady used to know, but that time it was, the height
Was shorter than this, and why don't you come over here and I'll close this hatch so we can stand back in. So the lens that we saw downstairs would sit right here. It would go up to here. So it would be. So you remember you had a lens up here which was about this big, so you didn't have much room to walk around.
Can
Now,
we have a silence for a moment so that we can capture the sound of this room?
You mean the fly?
I didn't bring the key for the scuttle, but. When it's really howling up here, this is my favorite place to come. I love to go out on this. I call it a widow's walk. In Maine, if you're in the eastern seaboard, a lot of homes have these little structures like this. They're called widow's walks. Is because when the ship captains would go out to sea, their wives would come out and wait for them, and a lot of times they didn't come back, so they called them widow's walks. But now, remember, the lighthouse keeper would have to go out on this thing when the windows got dirty or frosted up. They would have to go out here. Now, remember, you're coming out here at midnight or 1 in the morning, and it's blowing a gale, raining. You know, you had to keep this light lit because there were people out there that were counting on you having this thing lit.
So after this was with the Coast Guard station, and when you were here, were you a witness of, or did you hear any stories from your uncle about witnessing the shipwrecks here?
No, there was there was a shipwreck, 1954. The Prince Wilhelm, which was a Scandinavian freighter, was leaving the port, and it struck another barge carrying a boat pulling a lot of barges, and it got caught up. The story was it got caught up in the tow lines, and something hit it, and it poked a hole in the thing, and she sank right off. She's right off the. See where that white? There's another lighthouse right down the port. In fact, that one is going to be opening up as part of the Water Institute. UWM, I think, is doing some kind of a water institute. Someone bought that, and they're going to restore that, and it's just going to be part of the Lake Water Institute. But that lighthouse was the harbor light. Now that was the person that lived here in this house. There was a family that serviced that light. In fact, the man that lived in this house, Rhoda, he died on that house. He was painting it, and the scaffolding broke, and he fell to his death. But he lived in this house, but he died on that house. So that house might be haunted. I don't know. But shipwrecks, no. I don't remember. He never spoke of. But he did. My uncle he joined the Coast Guard in 1937 in the academy in 1937, and he was then the Second World War. He was a skipper of several ships called LSTs. Those are the landing ships with the big doors on the front of them. He put the first tank on Okinawa during the Second World War. He was a skipper of several ships, in his career, but he always said about Lake Michigan was that this was worse than the ocean, being on the ocean, because on the ocean, when you get into a storm of the swells in an ocean, a ship will ride the swells, but on the Great Lakes, even though they're wide, they're still narrow, and what happens is that the wind pushes the waves to the shore and they come back. So the troughs between the waves are a lot narrower. So a ship would get in a trough and they couldn't get out of the trough fast enough. A lot of times they were capsized. Especially the oar boats, the very long narrow boats. The worst recorded storm on the Great Lakes was November of 1913. It was called the White Hurricane. There was a book at the library, you can get it at Whitefish Bay Library, called The White Hurricane. 40 ships were destroyed, 40 were destroyed, 20 sunk, and 250 lives were lost. It was the early stages of weather forecasting, so they really didn't, in those days, if a storm was coming, they put flags up, pennants, little red flags that meant, storm warnings, but if the ships didn't see it, or a lot of ships would still go out there, these guys, they would go out. It's amazing that you take a schooner out here and pry the lakes. But it's really pretty out here in the fall. When you come up here when the trees are turning, it's really nice. Or in the wintertime when the first snow falls, it's really, really pretty. See all the animal tracks down there.
What are these?
These would live. Okay, now remember at night. Okay, before electricity and things like that, you had a light here, and it would ambient light. It would light the room below it. So it would just let natural ambient light in from the first level here at the bottom of these stairs. The keeper would have a wooden, like a little cupboard, and they'd keep the hurricane lights and things in there, so they wouldn't have to carry them up the stairs every 3 hours. So they would have a. Oh, I was going to let you do your 360 here.
I'll do that.
Okay, but they would have a little, and there used to be a stove, a little wood burning stove right here in the next level, because it would get in the summertime this becomes an oven, and in the wintertime it's an ice box. Now remember a lens. You had this Fresnel lens in here with all the prisms and stuff. And I remember when we were, I don't know about you, but when us guys, when we were kids, we used to try to kill ants with a magnifying glass. It'd get really hot. Well, in the summertime, or now, even tonight, you get that light coming in here could start a fire. So they would have curtains in here. They would curtain this all off, so the sunlight wouldn't melt the lens. And then as the homes started becoming, as they started building the neighborhood, they would have to curtain these walls, because at night you'd be laying in bed and there's this big light would be coming through every 30 seconds. This light would be coming through. Now this light, I mentioned this light rotated every 30 seconds. It had what was called a bullseye. So if you were out on the lake, you'd see this light coming like this. So now a captain of a ship, if you've been out on the lake at night, it's pitch black. You see a light. You don't know where the hell you are. There's a light. Well, all the ships would have captains would have a log book. And it would say, North Point light would flash every 30 seconds. The next light here, Port Washington, might flash. It might be a stationary light, or every 1 minute. So they knew where they were by this flashing of the light. And during the day, now not so much on the Great Lakes, but if you notice along the eastern seaboard, lighthouses have stripes on them, or they're different colors. Those are called day markers. Same thing, you're out on the ocean, you see a lighthouse, you don't know what it is, but if it's, that one has got the red stripes on it, they had like a little cheat sheet. That's Sandy Hook, or that's Cape Hatteras. That's how they knew where they were going. Let's see if we can catch the fly. This becomes very buggy in the summertime, believe me, it's really nasty here. So, we're ready to go back down? Yeah. Okay, now, we'll let him, now when you come down, just hang on to this railing here.
Yeah.
Here, I can grab your book for you if you want to. Let me put the. Just hang on to this railing and just come on. Keep your body straight, and just hang on to the railing. There you go. Straight down. Just look straight ahead. Look straight ahead. It's better to look straight ahead than if you're afraid of heights, you don't see how far you're going to fall. You're doing great.
Oh, we're in the area with circulations.
Watch the back of your head. No, that's our little first aid kit we have.
Oh, okay.
And we're, well, yeah, that or we have some window cleaning stuff up there and some bug spray and things like that. So, and we get once in a while you get people, they get up there and they go, "Oh, I'm afraid of heights." I got one guy who was up there one time, young guy, probably about your age, you know. He got up there and he was standing there looking at he had his hands in his pockets and he was looking at his shoes. And I said, "What's the matter?" He goes, "I'm terrified of heights. I don't know how I even got up here." So I had to help him down. Yeah, it's all this is all with, you know, put together with, you know, as like a puzzle. Yeah, there was probably a little cupboard here. That might have been for the stove hole. I don't know where the stove hole would have been. When they restored this lighthouse, the only thing they did to the tower. Oh, there it is, right there. There you go. The only thing they did was paint it. There's been no, and we added that rail up at the top. That was it. This is all. Pretty much, this is it. This is the original.
When the lighthouse keeper would have to come up every 3 hours, you said there was a stove up here, would they ever stay up here during that time?
Well, a lot of times they would have to do it, especially when it was cold outside. You know, the lard that was lard oil or mineral oil was kind of. They had to get it a little more liquidy, so they probably had a little wood burning stove up here. They would stay. No, they wouldn't stay up here for the duration. No, they would go up and you know, make sure it was working, the mechanism, and go back downstairs and you know, go back to bed, I guess. Georgia used to say that her bedroom window she could look out her bedroom window and see the light, and she said it would soothe her. You know, it's a soothing, calming. That's another thing we have. We're having a new group of it's a women's initiative. It's called the Georgia Circle, and they're using this place as sort of it has a calming effect when you come here. Because again, it's a place, you know, it's never going to fall down. You know, nothing. There's no storm that can knock this thing over. And again, it's a place that has, it's a place that, you know, you come to the light. You're guided to the light. Pretty interesting. You can pass. You pass on the camera.
No, he's heading down.
He's heading down. All right. Watch the back of your head.
Yeah, thank you.
Keep your feet in the center of the rungs if you can. It's easier going down than it is going up. Imagine walking up this ladder when you were Georgia and you had to wear one of those long dresses and you had those boots with the little, you know, laced up. So women were not allowed to wear pants here until the 20s probably. Where are you from?
I'm from India.
India. I have a very good friend who works for GE. He's Indian also. He lives in Bangalore.
Okay. So he moved back to India.
He was from India. He came and worked for GE. He's an engineer. He went back to India. He's back in India now.
I know a lot of Indians work in GE.
Yeah, oh yeah. I work for an advertising agency, and we do a lot of advertising for GE Healthcare. So there's a lot of them.
But I really imagine how that lady's life would have been. She would have been awake for the whole night.
Pretty much, yeah. And she, remember, you know, she also raised the son while she was here too.
Yeah. And then climb the stairs for
Yeah.
every 3 hours.
Every 3 to 4 until
Long rest.
until like so start at she'd start probably around now. Now tonight it gets started in the so she'd probably start to go upstairs. But it's 7:45. So you're going to be back here tomorrow night, right? Are you coming back tomorrow night for the lecture?
Yes, we
so.
are.
And then I think tomorrow night our board president, John Scripp, will be here. He's a very interesting gentleman. He's the one that was influential in getting this place open.
I think he's on our schedule for tomorrow. I think we're going to
Yeah.
interview him tomorrow.
Oh, you are? Okay. Well, that's right. Yeah, he'll be here tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right? He can tell you all about how, you know what, when this place, they decided to turn this in, to restore this place, a lot of people in the neighborhood did not want this to happen because they thought, oh, the cars, the parking, the people, they didn't want this to happen. We finally they're warming up to us now. You know, they realize it's a good thing. You know, it turned out to be a good thing. You know, I might as well close up while you're. I'm gonna lock it up.
All right.
Did you want to take a look upstairs
Sure.
or the basement? Were you
Oh,
interested
yeah.
in the basement?
Yeah.
I can show you the basement. My workshop. My workshop is down here.
It's warm.
Yeah, this is the new section of the they added this when they restored the house, but this was the original basement. You can see the old stone wall. This was a little crawl space that goes out to the tunnel. And then this is a crawl space under the house.
So this is the added portion of the basement.
This was the added portion, right? This is the original. This is the original. This is the original.
Interesting you found.
Yeah, there's. This is interesting. Somebody that lived here painted on the walls. There's someone that lived here.
And there's something written there.
Yeah, it's Carl and Shelley. It says here. There's some other little. Rosie. There's somebody in Shelley's. Could have been somebody that lived here at one time. A 1,000 years from now, they'll think these were like cave paintings.
Fresco.
Frescoes. Yeah. And this is where I work on exhibits. I've got a ship's wheel that I have to find a stand for, make a stand for. This weighs pretty heavy. Okay. Okay.
I think these were added steps. So
Yeah, these were.
before,
But there was a cellar here. There was a cellar. She probably accessed the cellar from outside. Go upstairs. These are the, when this was a single family home, these were bedrooms up here, and then once it became a duplex, this became another family's home. But this is now our boardroom. This was probably, the original house was probably the master bedroom in the original house. Bedrooms are probably upstairs, living quarters downstairs. My office. They're just office areas.
So you hold special events here?
Oh yeah, a lot of weddings. In fact, I'm going to be working here Saturday for a wedding. You know, we're pretty well booked for weddings in the August, September, and we have you know, we have lectures. We have lecture series here, group meetings, clubs come here, kind of stuff. Here, you take this along. It's interesting. Read about Georgia.
Do you think that's because of just the ideal location, or are they groups that have some sort of connection to Lake Park or
Well,
Lighthouse?
we had the lecture series. We had a woman who wrote a book about the Lady Elgin. I told you about that ship that sank. Her great grandmother died on that ship, so she learned how to dive and dove once, and that was on that ship. She wanted to go down and see where her grandmother's grave was, and she wrote a book about it. Another woman wrote a book about the Rouse Simmons, the Christmas tree ship, that she spoke here. And then another woman wrote, it was called The Soul of the Port. It's about the whole port of Milwaukee, and it's an interesting book. So, and we have, and some are just like garden clubs, women's clubs, parties. Some people have parties here. Someone had a graduation party here a couple weeks ago. A young boy, a young guy, graduated from high school. He loved lighthouses, so he wanted to have his graduation party here. But in fact, a lot of weddings. We had the have you heard of Patron? Is it tequila?
Tequila.
They had this dinner. It's one of those secret. It's a club where
Yeah.
Milwaukee was one of them, and they had it here.
Oh wow.
And I got to come here for that, and did they do a number? The whole big New York ad agency or PR agency came in here, and they had the 4 or 5 course dinners with all the tasting things, sit down tables. It was unbelievable. They projected the logo, Patron logo, on the tower, projected on the outside the tower, and yeah, they had these people. They met downtown someplace for cocktails, and they didn't know where they were going. It was like 30 of them, I think, and they brought them on the secret dinner, and they brought them here, and then they gave their little spiel about Patron, and they had these 2 guys, these mixologists. They're on the Wisconsin Foodie once in a while. These 2 guys, a thin guy and a heavyset guy, they do all kinds of mixologists. They were here doing stuff. They were creating their own concoctions, and then they had this lavish dinner. Feckler, the chef Feckler, he's forgot what restaurant he has here, but he did all the food, and pretty cool. Yeah, there's a wedding here. In fact, a good friend of mine is getting married here Saturday. But so I'm a guest and a docent.
Nice.
So Mark, thanks a lot for sharing with us everything.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
And would you like to add something if you feel that we missed on to wrap up the?
I just hope that you can carry our message, and I think you are by doing what you're doing here tonight. You're taking the message of not only just a structure, but a way of life, and an historical, adventure that we are all on, learning about our ancestry and our history. So I think it's very important that people know about this, because we're a destination. for not just tourists, but for people coming here from all over the world. Many years ago, on ships, leaving their homes all over the world, taking what their little possessions that they had, coming to a new world, and being guided here by a light, and getting here and saying, "I'm home now, my new home." So that's kind of an interesting thing. So thank you. This here is kind of I turned this on for you. We had a guy come here last summer. He built this remote control helicopter thingy. It's about 8 feet in diameter, and he's got this big remote control thing, and he hooks up. He has a camera right down here, and he just turns the thing on, and it goes, and he sailed this thing all. He just stood on there, and he guided it all around the lighthouse, and he put this together for us. He came back twice, and he edited the whole thing. You would not get this. There's no other way you could get this footage, but it's like.
I was thinking that looks like an RC plane.
Yeah, it's a hover thing. Yeah, he's done a bunch of these things.
Nice.
So yeah, he wanted to. So it was one of those things where we'll advertise for him, and so you get the feeling what a bird would see. That tree right there, that tree out here and one out here, I think are two of the original trees. I want to put a plaque on those sometime. Yeah, that's a neat pass. He took over that thing. Whoa. This painting was done by a man by the name of Lewandowski, Edmund Lewandowski. He was the guy that designed on the outside of the art museum down here, the War Memorial, that mosaic. He designed that. He was also the president of Leighton School of Art, the dean of Leighton School of Art for a number of years.
I thought also Myad. That's what Myad came from too. It was kind of that.
Myad was. I was in my. I started at Leighton School of Art in 1972. In 1974, I was my second year there. The faculty wanted to form a union. The board of directors didn't want to have the union. They brought somebody in to break the union, and they finally said, you know what, screw it, we're closing the school down. And Leighton School of Art had been around since the 20s, early 20s. Very well, nationally known art school. They closed it. I had to find a new place to go to school, so I ended up out in the Portland School of Art in Portland, Maine. But after Leighton closed, there were several instructors that started Myad. It was called the Milwaukee School of Art and Design. Now it's Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. I taught at Myad for about 4 years. I taught a night school and advertising class there. Turn this off.